Hey, all. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about turning your passion into a business. And to do that, you're going to use data to sustain growth and profit. My name's Dustin Jeffers. I have Aaron Kiefner here with me. We're both from Next Class, and we'll start jumping right in. So, Next Class, if you're not familiar with us, we like to say the worldwide leader in bev tech. Shout out to anyone that gets the ESPN reference there. So we have a bunch of different offerings that can help breweries in the tech world. So we have Untapped. We also have Untapped for Business, Beer Advocate, Hop Culture, Ollie, which is an ERP system, which we'll be talking about today. And we also have Osner. So this is not a sales talk on Ollie, but is kind of a sales talk on having a system in place and the importance of gathering all that information that you can get from an ERP system on a batch to batch level. This talk is one of Aaron and my's soapboxes. We love to talk about it. We both have past working history in the brewing industry, both on the operations level. So it's something we're both passionate about. So to start off, I'll let you hear about Aaron's past history.
All right. So just to give you guys a little background, so you don't think that I'm not legit, or either of us aren't legit. Kind of started my career in the beer industry over 12 years ago. So started kind of big to small with Goose Island. I actually started out on the marketing side of things and doing kind of brand ambassador work. I actually worked as like a part-time national brand ambassador, doing what we called migration weeks, where we traveled to other cities and did, education with distributors and things like that, all the way to like hosting block parties. I then moved over to an operations role at Goose Island when that opened up. I really wanted to get experience on both the kind of marketing, sales side and operations, in hopes that maybe a smaller brewery would need a GM of sorts, or operations person. So worked in wholesale support for almost 3 years in that role, really supporting Goose Island's long list of distributors around the country. So then I moved over to Revolution Brewing in May of 2017, heading up their specialty beer program. So everything from their brew pub schedule and release through their deep wood and their small batch 16-ounce program, which was rolled out during my time there and still exists to this day. So I did that for a little over 2 years, and then moved on to an opportunity at More Brewing. They were bringing on a production facility. This was shortly before the pandemic. So I kind of was tagged with helping open our production facility and then also overseeing all operations, marketing, and sales. So I took that on, especially during the pandemic, grew that. And then in November of 2022, towards the end of November, moved into my role at Next Glass. At More, we were basically almost using the entire portfolio that Next Glass had. We had moved over to Ollie. We were using Osner since the pandemic. Untapped menus and data insights and things like that. So it just was kind of a natural progression, having experience in all of that to come over. And so I'm currently in my role as a solutions consultant. If you ever do a demo with us, there's a good chance that your demo is going to be done by myself or my counterpart, Alex. And then kind of also work with our development team and Dustin to kind of roll out updates and things like that. So
Cool. And for myself, I went to school at UConn for speech pathology, moved down to Florida for my master's in speech pathology at Florida Atlantic. And then, like a lot of people in the beer industry, didn't do anything with my actual degree and jumped into the beer world instead. So I had this opportunity while I was doing my externship at FAU. So I was one of the co-founders at Saltwater Brewery in Delray Beach. Started as an assistant brewer and worked my way up to the head of operations there. So I was handling our ERP, taxes, all that stuff while still doing recipes and brewing. So that was a little more than 10 years ago. Around the pandemic time, I jumped over to Three Sons down in South Florida also. They were barely a year in, getting a lot of hype, doing a lot of growth. So I started with them as their director of ops. Similar to Aaron, we were using pretty much everything in the Next Glass portfolio, doing Untapped for Business for menus, data and insights, using Osner for our memberships. And then we were also switching over to Ollie as well. So I started in the same role as Aaron as a solutions consultant. Last year, I was the director of brewery implementation. So any breweries that came and onboarded onto the system, I oversaw that team. And now I'm the vice president of brewery product and experience. So always love to hear feedback on our system, things people would like to see. We also, besides just Aaron and I, we have a lot of other people with brewing experience on the team. So we also get to try stuff out and try to break it before we send it to all of you guys. So this presentation, like I said earlier, is about turning your passion into like a real business. So we've known for some time that beer is no longer the standard. You have to do more than just have good beer to be successful. But now, especially since the pandemic and the current climate in the beer industry, selling a lot of beer and growing your production is no longer good enough either. Before, you used to be able to just brew it and they will come. But now you really need to start looking at your data, know your business plan, and how you're doing versus your goals, and start looking at real ways to expand. Uh, Expanding distribution, doing more states, adding more product SKUs is not necessarily the way anymore. So first, before we get into all the data and stuff to track, we're going to go over business plans. So if you're not open yet, it's really important to have a business plan. I'm sure you've heard that a bunch. But if you are open, which I'm guessing most of you are, it's also really important to look back at your business plan and revisit and see where you're at versus what you were projecting when you first opened. We talked to a lot of people and they haven't looked at their business plans since they did their initial raise or their opening. I think it's really important to keep going back, see where you're at, see how things have changed. Your business plan is not necessarily a one and done thing. You should constantly be revisiting it and expanding upon it. You really want to know how your revenue sources have changed and also your distribution relationships. Distribution's been crazy the past couple of years. There's been consolidation. You may not have the same relationship. You may no longer be the like big dog in your distributor. You may be severely down in their book because they've started to get some bigger breweries in it. So really important to look back at all that stuff in your business plan. Also, another important thing is to go in and see what you want to do for your next year, your next 5 years, and your next 10 years. So there's multiple ways to grow. A lot of people are like, hey, we want to grow and double this year. But what does that mean? What are you trying to double? Are you trying to double what your actual barrelage was? Are you trying to double what your revenue was? Are you trying to double what your profit is? Or are you trying to double what the worth of your company is? All those things may seem the same, but they are very different and you can achieve them different ways. Another important thing as you're going through, and if you are starting to look at distribution, is are your core beers scalable? This is something that a lot of people will go in and they are just doing sales through their tasting room. They have a really hot beer. It's selling out all the time. They can barely keep up with it. But they're small, so they're only tracking the recipe once, figuring out what their cost of goods are, and not really seeing how it's changing over time. We'll get into that in the next couple of slides and why it's important. But it is important to start looking at your core beers, especially if you're about to do into distribution. As I mentioned earlier, with this, growth does not necessarily equal success. Another important part is looking at your lab and quality control program. are you going to be able to sustain all of this growth that you're looking at? For us at Saltwater, we got 790 Publixes overnight one summer, and that was all in cans. We were just starting out. Luckily, we put some money into our lab, but we definitely had to buy even more equipment to make sure that our cans were going out correctly. If you get something like Publix, grocery store chains, stuff like that, usually you only have one chance to make a good impression, and you don't want to mess that up. And as we go through, we will talk about distribution a lot. It sounds awesome, but you need to really figure out, is the juice worth the squeeze when it comes to distro and growth? We don't want this to seem like a distro bashing presentation. Sometimes it's very important and it's a great part of your business plan, but you want to be armed with all the correct information before you go down that path. So knowing your COGS is an important reason to have a system in place before you go into that distribution. Some people go in and say, we're too small to have a system. We're only going through the tasting room. We'll reach back out when we start distribution next summer. That's all well and good, but it's a lot cheaper to start tracking all this information that you can get out of your system, batch to batch differences, start thinking about all of this in a business mindset versus kind of the hype of how your beers are doing in your tasting room versus signing on to a distributor, putting a system in place, tracking your COGS, and realize that you may have a lost leader in your market. So when you are going in and creating a system, one of the important things that you're able to track is your batch to batch differences. So your cost of goods can do a swing over the year. It's not rare to have a $13 per barrel swing from batch to batch. That's actually pretty small when talking to some people, my past history, Aaron's. It's not odd to have that $13 swing. When you break that down, that can be a $6.50 in half kegs, $2.17 in sixtels, or a $97 cost of goods swing in cases. So if you look at that over a month, that could be $1,143 in cost of goods swing that you're seeing, or $13,718 over a year. It seems small when you're looking at just being 97 cents a case, but that can really add upon itself when you're looking at all of your cost of goods over a year. When you're looking at our cost of goods, we also want to look at our revenue. So when you go and look at how much you're making in a tasting room, a sixtel to distro would be $62 usually that you're selling it to your distributor for. But that same sixtel in your front of house, if you're doing $7 16-ounce pours, is $289 worth of revenue. So with that, when you go and sell in distro, you need to sell 4.6 kegs in distro to cover that one sixtel in your front of house. The important thing to remember is this is just revenue. It's not profit. A lot of times breweries will go in, look at how much revenue they're making and say, hey, let's just go out to distro. We can bring more and more revenue in. You really need to look at your profit, which we'll get into in the next slide. There's also other things you need to look at besides just the cost of goods of your raw materials. We have labor, utilities, rent, licensing fees. I think it's really helpful to have a separate spreadsheet to keep track of all this stuff. It's always a changing number. It's a lot easier on the accounting side to kind of keep all of this, look at it every quarter and do an audit on yourself. It's not rare to have an extra $40 in all of these other cost of goods that you have to add to every half keg, $13 for a sixtel, or $5.80 for a case. So if we look at this revenue and all the cost of goods, we can break down and look deeper past revenue and look at profit. So here we can see our slides from the previous screen, see how much revenue we're getting from our distribution and our front of house. Then you add in your cost of goods for raw materials with or without labor, and then also that possible $40 variance when it comes to a sixtel. And when we look at our profit in the tasting room versus distribution, if you're just looking at raw materials, a keg sold to a distributor you may be making a $37 profit on. If you look at that same keg through the front of house, you're going to be making a $264 profit on that. If you add in all of that, instead of that 4.6 kegs that you have to sell to match your revenue from distro to the front of house, you're now looking at 7.16 stills that you have to sell to distro.
Do we lose Dustin? All right. I think Dustin might be having some internet issues. So I think we're just going to continue on. And we might actually continue on without the slideshow for right now. So the next part in our presentation is going over knowing your order efficiency as well as your landed material costs. So this is kind of where either this is the part where Dustin mentioned, you don't necessarily have to, be using Ollie, but using a system to help calculate things is really going to help you in the long run. So the first thing that we kind of mentioned as far as knowing your order efficiency is projecting your costs. So seeing your costs, your potential costs before even brewing is going to be hugely beneficial to you. I like to give a lot of real life experiences that I had in the past. So, a few years ago, we brewed a wet hop beer, as is super popular, obviously, around this time. And having not done that at Moore, we had no idea what those landed costs were going to look like for this. So a really big thing on that was, seeing what the potential costs were before we even brewed the product. Bringing in things like the costs of the hops and then calculating the recipe and then seeing what our potential cost for that batch was going to be. Not only let us know what we needed to sell that price point wise in our tap room, but also it told us, can we even bring this to distro? Are we going to profit what we need to bring any of this to distro, or do we need to sell it all ourselves? Ultimately, we determined that we need to sell it all ourselves in order to make, the profit margin, minuscule as it is, to kind of go forward. We had the same thing with a beer that we did the same nature at Revolution. Kind of seeing that ahead of time really helps you to make smart decisions. The next thing is forecasting your materials. Seeing when you're going to run out of something is huge for multiple reasons. One is that's going to help you not have to delay brews and beers. One of the worst things that you can do is, you forget to order something and the brew is coming up and you go, shoot, we don't have this item. So then, for some people, that means that you then have to delay that brew until it comes in. I was fortunate enough that, almost my entire life and brewing, career in beer, I was in Chicago where we have a lot of breweries. So the nice thing is, we have a great guild there. And if somebody ran out of something, you can send an email to, the email listserv. And more than likely, somebody is going to go, yep, I got you covered. Come by and pick it up, or we can even meet up somewhere. A lot of places aren't like that. So if you forget something or run out of something, then it for sure is probably leading to you having to delay that brew until you actually get the item in. So, using like a raw material forecast tool, or especially with packaging materials was more than likely the thing that I was, kind of forgetting, thinking we had enough labels and then actually not having enough. So those forecast tools can really help you from getting in that bind. The other thing that it can help you do is not pay rush shipping. So, Dustin kind of mentioned, and we'll go over kind of landed costs of materials. That $13 per barrel swing for sure comes with landed costs of ingredients. So as much as you can lower your landed costs for all of your ingredients, you are in turn going to raise your profit margins. And so kind of projecting out materials so that you can avoid rush shipping charges as well as running out of things is going to lower landed costs for everything. And, I bring this up a lot with breweries. Post pandemic, we did not get the bump in revenue or in volume that we had been seeing pre pandemic and we were hoping to get back to. So that, those are ways that then you look into without sacrificing the product itself, like the beer. We're not going to lower dry hop amounts if the beer tastes amazing, but kind of order efficiency and planning things out better are ways that you can not necessarily grow your volume, but can grow your profit margin for the business and things like that. Inventory tracking. Nope, go back one. So inventory tracking, seeing your current on hand and tracking your lots as well is a big thing. So, seeing how your lot tracking for each order impacts things and seeing those, kind of landed costs for each lot, that kind of goes into the next point of those landed costs, how the additional costs affect each lot and then tracking that, because you could have a product where you're using, say, 500 pounds of a base grain, and maybe 300 pounds of that are one price point and 200 pounds are a different price point. So, in spreadsheets, it gets really difficult to kind of calculate all those different lots and prices. Usually that's where you kind of do an average cost and you're not really honing in on what your exact batch to batch costs are over that. So comes in handy. All right. Next thing is going to be knowing your yields, your utilizations, and your efficiencies. So this pins into, again, lots and quantities. Your price per lot will, in fact, affect your cost of goods. So, kind of honing in on that and seeing where those costs lie in. One of the nice things is I had a pain point with a past system where if I didn't bring a PO in, I couldn't do anything. And I didn't have accurate costs. Like, as I was brewing, I would have to go back after the fact, whether it was, sometimes 2 weeks after we had already brewed, and then had to kind of run through the brew day. So, it was 2 weeks into that beer before I was seeing any sort of real-time costs that we were utilizing in the system. So it's nice to kind of, be able to do things, in the moment, capture as much of those costs as possible until I brought in that product. And with that become things like, efficient ingredient utilization. And again, Dustin pointed out earlier, kind of that is the juice worth the squeeze. You can talk to, 20 brewers out there, and you're probably going to get close to 20 answers of that inevitable question of what pound, like how many pounds per barrel is like the max for dry hops. Some breweries out there I know will say 2.5, 3 pounds. Some breweries will fall more like 5, 6. And then you've got breweries out there that are saying, 9, 10 or nothing. So kind of knowing your product, not only from hops, but even grain and things like that, really honing in on your beers. A lot of us are small and kind of, doing a lot of R&D, and that is costly for us to do, frankly. But it is important, kind of honing in on your batches and really taking the time to, capture the data and things like that is really important so that you are utilizing your ingredients to the best of your ability, getting the best flavor without really wasting ingredients and things like that. Because you overuse and you waste, ingredients, you're also wasting money and making the beers more costly and things like that. And then that goes in with, diminished returns and things like that. And then really seeing your finished goods cost and how the end result is captured from that standpoint. I didn't really look at finished goods cost before getting into a system, and then realized, one, kind of how much I liked seeing that kind of data, and it brought out the inner nerd in me on that side. But then also seeing how that fluctuated from batch to batch was, really important, and kind of seeing, even pitfalls in the brewery and things like that. I could look at a cost of good or like a cost batch over batch, and could actually potentially see an issue that we had in the brew house, whether, our canning line had something that was, crushing cans and causing higher costs because we were wasting more materials. I wasn't overseeing operations and marketing and sales. You can't be on the floor a lot. So you're tied into, in those situations, either looking at the data to kind of analyze where problems or even successes lie in the brewery, or your team needs to communicate these things, like, for sure. When they have a problem, they need to communicate it. And when they have a really great yield and run and product, they should be sharing that with everyone in the company as well. And then finally on this, just goes into your yeast as well. So all the way down to, tracking your generations on repitches, things like that. And like how those cogs in relate to your yeast. Talk to a lot of people that will say, oh, we're doing in spreadsheets, and we have a $500 yeast pitch, and we put that cost on our first batch. And my response is always, and then what? And sometimes it's, well, that's it. We just, we need to pin that cost, so we pin it on that. And I always think that's weird, because really you should be utilizing your yeast cost on every batch that you can. So, utilizing systems and things like that for, the most part. And this is kind of where we're in the realm of knowing how Ollie can help. Just being able to see those generations and controlling your costs over your yeast is really important, and kind of being able to fluctuate that cost so that you can see your efficiencies and inefficiencies in the finished product from all aspects, all of your ingredients and materials that you might be using, in even your yield. And then the final thing that I'm going to kind of touch point on in this section is, knowing your yields, your utilizations, efficiencies. This is kind of where this section gets a little subjective, so to speak. So tracking your loss and your yields for me is really important. Seeing what your pre-boil volume is and what your knockout volume is, and the percentage points of how those vary between different styles, and really a brand over brand. A lot of us are doing variations on IPAs and stouts and things like that. So seeing how one version of an IPA differs from one with a different dry hop or things like that, and kind of tracking those is really important. Seeing your volume that is going from fermenter to your bright tank, or fermenter to your barrels if you're doing a lot of barrel aging, and kind of tracking that. And, even on the barrel side, tracking your angel share, and how kind of weather in wherever you're storing your barrels is eventually affecting the end product and the volume that you're getting out of it. All those things are really important and in turn lead to your end costs and things like that. And then finally, of course, is packaging, being able to accurately record your loss. So like one of the cool things, that I will kind of pinpoint in Ollie is tracking your loss per container. For me was a huge benefit that I saw. I was lucky enough that our facility, we did have sight glasses on our bright tanks. So, when we packaged off, you could actually see, we packaged off our half barrels. Starting volume was, 57 barrels. We packaged these off, and our end volume when we were done doing half barrels was this, recording any loss that we might have had on that. Same thing for sixtels, same thing for our case runs. We were doing containers as well for export. So kind of tracking all that by container type was huge. And then seeing our landed costs for each container type. If you have a bad can run, you want to be able to record that loss accurately and see the overall cost on what that inefficient run did to your batch. So that's where it comes into that.
That's something we also stress a lot when people are onboarding with us. A lot of people will just dump the beer that's left in whatever system they're using at the end of the packaging run. Accounting wise, end of the day, it does all go to your profit and loss, kind of at the bottom of your books. But it is, we think, really important to start tracking that loss and have all that cost get captured in all of your different package types. The other part about it, which you're able to track what your loss is per package type, is really important when it comes to cases. Everyone kind of knows making 5 barrels worth of sixtels or halves takes a lot less beer than to make 5 barrels worth of cases. A lot of times your canning line is going to take a sixtel just to get everything through, get it cooled down. You have loss at the end of the canning run. You have your labeler getting messed up, backing up your whole machine, seam issues, all that stuff that we've lived through. And your cases are usually what you're going to make the less profit on. So it's really important to capture that cost and see what those differences are batch over batch. Maybe you're doing a new technique to cool down the canning line. Maybe you got a new labeler. It'd be really cool to be able to track and see how those costs have changed for your cans over time.
Yeah. Last two things that I was going to pinpoint here. These are kind of more of your what you guys choose to do, and some of these are kind of honestly nice to haves. So first thing are kind of processes. Doing things like yeast dumps or making sure that you're doing regular maintenance on stuff in the brewery. From the brew house to all the way to the can line, all the way to I hate to mention it, your boiler, and just making sure that thing's not going to go down. We've all been there where glycol goes down in the most inconvenient times, usually when it's hot as hell in the middle of summer, things like that. But kind of those are also things that are going to help with your yield and increase your profit margins, because it will in fact lower your costs. Whatever you guys kind of figure out from that standpoint is really up to you. And there's probably things that we're not even listing here that make sense. But then it also goes into equipment, things like flow meters, centrifuges, automation. These are things that will in fact kind of pay for themselves over time. A lot of them, some of them, especially centrifuges, not cheap by any means. And then it's kind of are there things that you can do at the brewery that can maybe afford to pay for those? For us, to shine a little light on Osner, even though we're not talking about it, we used our membership at More to help pay for our centrifuge in advance. And in doing so, we saw our yields increase exponentially. That thing paid itself off a lot quicker than I really thought it was going to. And so we saw the need for it and kind of figured out a way to raise the capital to get that, because we saw that it was very, very important. And so, even flow meters, and it goes back to calculating your volume, pre-boil and knockout volume, and what goes from fermenters to bright tanks and things. Flow meters, if you don't have sight glasses, can help kind of calculate those things. Automation can help just not break the back of your brew team. I was at Goose Island when they still didn't even have super sacks. And I remember the day that they brought in super sacks, when I was there, the brew team was like the happiest I've ever seen anybody, because, they just don't have to break themselves every day, lifting tons and tons of 55-pound bags. But also then the company is benefiting, because maybe, then they don't have brewers potentially hurting themselves and out on workman's comp because of those things that automation can help with. And then it goes into, adjunct tanks and circulation pumps, just things to, again, kind of get more efficiency out of your beers and hopefully bigger yields. Things like canning and bottling lines, not everybody has those. And just kind of figuring out ways to invest. I will say the Gosling is like one of the coolest things, out there. It takes up very little space. I have a friend at Flipside Brewing in Illinois that he's a one-man show, uses that thing, does everything himself. And it, works out really well for him. So just kind of, having things like that can then also just bring extra revenue to your business, where you can have to-go package in your tap rooms, where, you don't have to rely on crawlers, which just don't have the shelf life that cans do, and things like that. So.
Cool. And last thing we're going to go over is knowing your packaging splits, sales, and profits. So with this, it's, again, like we just talked about, really important to add the loss during packaging to your cost of goods for the batch. As we mentioned, a case of beer takes a lot more beer to actually produce in the end than the equivalent of that sixtel. So cases, especially if you're going into distro, is probably where you're going to have most of your growth. But it's also really important to know what your cost of goods are, be able to track your loss per container, and accurately pinning that loss percentage. As you go through your entire brewing process, of course, your cost per barrel should go up. But equipment, as Aaron just mentioned, can help to reduce this loss. So it is important to see where it makes the most sense to put your money and gain that return. Centrifuges, yes, they are a lot of money. If you're doing a lot of IPAs and going through those, it is going to have a return on your money much quicker. I remember at Saltwater, when we did get into Publix, our number one beer was an IPA. We had a lenticular filter, and we were having to backflush all the time. Our filtering sessions were significantly longer. Once we got that centrifuge, we got an instant return in profitability because of man hours. We also got more beer out of the process. But it's also not all just a business decision. We also got an increased return in quality. The beer was clearer, the beer tasted better, and it had a longer shelf life. So when looking at all of this, it's not just looking at your cost of goods, but also looking at man hours as well. And with all this, your cost of goods can change over time. You change a process, ingredient change. We've all dealt with increased cost in goods. That can all affect your bottom line when it comes to your beer. So it is important to start tracking that in whatever system you have. Again, talking previously about having spreadsheets. Some people will go in the first time they brew a beer, they'll track the COGS, and then they won't track it again. That cost for that batch may have been a lot cheaper. You got better yields. Everything was working well. You got better efficiency out of your mash. So you may be working off a number that's not necessarily correct. So that's why it is important to keep tracking your cost of goods per batch and revisiting it constantly. Also, you want to track your sales to see your package splits. you really don't want to touch your beer more than you need to. You also want to make sure that you're keeping as fresh of stock as you can for each different package type. So with all that, knowing your packaging splits, your sales, your profits, your sales manager should really be in your production calls. They should always be constantly checking what inventory levels you have of your beers, and then what's also coming down the pipeline. Being able to look back at your sales from last year, the year before, the season before, and be prepared for seasonality and all those changes is really important. And again, the amount per package type. You really want to minimize how much you're jumping from halves into sixtels. We've all been there. Distro order comes in, we don't have enough sixtels, and we got to start jumping beer. Um, it adds to your man hours. It also can degrade the quality of the beer. You're taking it from one vessel to the other. We like to have the most sanitary practices, but stuff can happen. Oxygen can happen. So you may be degrading the lifespan of that beer. So there's kind of two things you'll want to look at. We make it pretty easy in our system. You're going to want to look at your total production in gallons or barrels on the production side. So then your brewers know how much they actually need to brew. So that's really important for your brew team. But then you want to know your packaging size for your cellar. I'm sure they would rather go in and look at this data and receive it and package the right types instead of later in the day on a Thursday having to quickly package some halves into sixtels, clean extra kegs because you're not able to fulfill your distribution order. I believe it's really important, especially in this current climate in the industry, is to have sales drive your production. As I said earlier, the days of expansion without a plan are kind of behind us. You can't just brew it and they'll drink it. You can't expect to just throw more beer out in a distro and then your distributor will sell it. Distributors are starting to tighten their belt, so are retailers. So it's really important that you're actually producing to match your sales and not just expect your sales reps to be able to sell whatever you're producing. And then kind of bigger picture, going in and be bigger than what you actually are when it comes to quality control once the beer hits the market and the information that you're giving to your distributor. There are bigger breweries than you that probably have a lot more money being able to use VIP, other sales techniques. So having a system in place that you're able to track your lot codes is really great to have. If you're able to go to your October meeting for your distributors, like ABP meetings for the next year, and tell them how much you're going through per package type, how often, if you're regularly checking their inventory, asking them what lot codes you have in stock, making sure they're doing their end in FIFO. So like first in, first out, they don't have older batches on the shelves. You can really impress them with that and also let them know that you're watching them. So keeping track of lot codes, knowing where they go is really important. Also, if you're self-distributing, keeping track of what lots of what package types are going to what customers. Most of us have had seam issues every once in a while. There may be an issue with a packaging run. It would be great to be able to go in and see where those cases were actually sold to. So you can just let those customers know. It's kind of a bad look on your end if you're going to mass send an email out to everyone that's bought your beer saying like, hey, please check if you have batch like 815. There's a possible seam issue. We'd be happy to go change those out for you. It's a lot better if you can go to just those customers, know how many units they sold. If you look up here in that first picture, you're able to go in, see your product name, see the container type, who the customer was, the invoice number, the date, and then how many units you sold them. If you can be proactive, go out, swap those cases for them. It's going to make you seem like a more impressive brewery than you may be for your size. So that's really great to have a system in place. Also, with these lot codes, being able to track your profit by lot. So like we've mentioned throughout this whole presentation, you can have a $13 per barrel swing in some of your batches, and sometimes it's much higher. So you could be selling the same amount of beer through distro through your front of house. Your revenue is going to look exactly the same, but your profit's not. And that profit is going to hit your cash flow. So saving the same amount of beer, getting the same amount of revenue, but the cash in your account is very different from batch to batch. So knowing when an expensive batch is coming down the line is important so you're not caught by surprise. Variance in the brewing industry can be very different compared to other manufacturing business types. We have everything from the grain when you're first mashing in to something happening when you're doing a yeast dump, a dry hop, issues with filtering, issues with packaging. There's a lot of different places throughout the brewing process that your loss can change. This isn't the same for every manufacturing company. Usually they're a lot more controlled. So this loss and this variance is not necessarily something your accountant knows, or if you're not from the brewing industry, like a lot of us were at first, something you may understand when it's first happening. So it's good to know all of this variance from the start before you start distributing and expanding. The last thing you want to do is to have multiple loss leaders out in the market, or have a loss leader if you don't even know it's going to be a loss leader, meaning something that you're actually not going to be making a whole lot of profit on. And that's what you're pushing to distribution. You want to make sure whatever you're selling to distro is something that you're going to be able to make a good profit on. Cool. Apologies for some internet issues at the start of it. Down in South Florida, storms and all. Florida's going to Florida at times. But if you have any questions, would like the presentation, would like to talk about it some more, here is my information and Aaron's QR code. Be able to scan it. It'll send all of our information, and we'd be happy to discuss anything with everyone.
Sweet.
If there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them right now also. Or again, feel free to reach out to us after.
Appreciate everyone having us.
Cool. Thanks all.